Welcome, everyone. Hey, Maddie, I see your hand is raised. I can't see you, but I can't see any of you. So this is like a strange void here that I'm talking into. Um, so, um, for me, the big question is, why do we do this work? Why do we do our work? For me, it's to engage with the world and engage with issues that I care about. And that I feel like using my passion and my skills for visual storytelling, that I can actually possibly make a difference. And what compels you to choose the projects that you focus on. For me, it's often a desire to focus on underreported issues, or to open up, new or fresh or different angles into a story or an issue that we think we may know. It took me years to understand how my work was already having an impact, and because I was so absorbed and obsessed with having my work published in magazines and kind of succeeding or making it in the editorial world so that I could have opportunities to hone my craft, to tell my stories. But and for most of us, it's not about having impact or changing the world. But for me, again, before I even understood what that meant or realized that I was doing it in my work, it was happening. And I'm going to share work with you in a moment. And the goal and my hope is that for you guys that I can show kind of the different paradigms and the new paradigms for producing and financing projects, and that the importance of being able to differentiate between personal work and client work, because it is important to feel comfortable with that. I know most of the major projects I've worked on in my career are personal projects, things that either I came up with, I proposed, or occasionally received a commission that ended up, lighting my fire around that story, around that issue, and then I extended it into a long-term personal project. I want to talk about, so I'll map out different scenarios that I've experienced, to stimulate ideas, visions, questions in your mind. By the way, if you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A section of the Zoom window, and then at the end, I'll address questions that didn't get answered along the way. The amazing Gianna is in the background, and she's monitoring that stuff. So anyway, I also want to emphasize the importance of authorship and, maintaining creative independence. These are critical elements for you to understand and to sort of be able to get when you're doing this kind of work, and to hold on to it, authorship and creative independence. So, the new paradigms for producing work with this idea of, advocacy work and having impact are, NGOs, foundations, nonprofits, and also academia. Academia is a great resource for funding. And I'll get into that towards the end of my presentation when I talk about our 6-year project, Newest Americans, about immigration in the United States. But for me, and it's important if any of you want to or are pursuing this kind of work, is that it's the vital necessity of wanting to have impact with your work, and to be clear on what those impacts are. All right, that is so important going into this, because like with all aspects of documentary photography, photojournalism, the profession in general, it's hard. You're gonna experience, no matter how successful you are, a lot of rejection, disappointment, and it's so important for you to be able to overcome that. Step over it, dust yourself off, get up, keep on moving forward. And the energy that allows you to do that is your passionate belief in what you're doing. Okay, so as I said, I want to show some examples of various projects throughout my career to highlight these different paradigms and opportunities and the impacts my work and our work can have. All right. So we're going to start with my work on the Kurds. But for me, advocacy began, as I said before, I was even aware of it. My work on the Kurds, which was produced in the early 90s, and it was also the first big project I did with National Geographic magazine. And these are the days where, you got a 26-week contract. It was a whole different world than we are living through now. But I became impassioned about the Kurdish cause when I learned about them being the largest ethnic group in the world without a nation of their own. And so I set off to go to the Middle East, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, the main countries where the Kurdish population live. But I also covered some of their diaspora in Germany and the UK. There are many Kurdish people in the United States as well. But for me, this was an early example of where, I was producing work under the vein of, editorial photojournalism, working with National Geographic. But the result of that work, and I also had the great honor and privilege of being able to work with Christopher Hitchens, an amazing thinker and writer who has since passed away. But together we produced a book, When the Borders Bleed. Yes.
Sorry to bother you. The photos aren't showing up. We're seeing just a white screen.
Okay. I know why that happens. Thank you for piping in there. I'm just gonna have to start sharing, reshare my screen.
Okay.
All right, I think this will do it. Gianna, thank you, because that would have been very boring to just look at the same image. Is it changing now?
Yep, all good.
Yay, okay, so that's where we started. All right, so again, this work, I've chronicled the Kurdish people for, on and off since 1991. So these images are from various periods of time. But the point I want to make in showing this work is that I was not looking at it in terms of advocacy work. I was looking at this, again, as I said, more in terms of, documentary photography, photojournalism, telling the story of a people that, whose story was just not told adequately in the West or to the West. Certainly Europeans had a great awareness of the Kurdish people. But since then, I have met, even just in the last month, numerous people, often young Kurds who grew up in somewhere in the Middle East or in Europe. And our book, Christopher Hitchens' and my book, actually had an impact on them. It helped to show them about their own culture and their own history. And I can't describe how powerful that is to feel, to realize that something you've produced could have an impact in that way, not only on people outside of the Kurdish community, of course, to raise awareness to the world about this issue, but also within the community to have created something that had value for them. That is, for me, just an amazing, it's amazing to know that that's possible, okay? So, and this is all before I even understood what advocacy work was or why you would even do that kind of work. The next project I want to talk about is my work on aging in America. This was an 8-year project, and this was after the work on the Kurds, and kind of, in a way, reflected the next step in my evolution as not only a visual storyteller and a long-term documentarian, but also in terms of advocacy work. And so my wife and I, Julie Winokur, who I work with a lot, we worked together on this project. We produced a book, we produced a 1-hour PBS film, websites, and a bunch of materials. And again, unwittingly, this work became and continues to this day to have value within social work, geriatric, all kinds of nursing, all kinds of disciplines, if you like, and areas of society where, for whatever reason, the work we created has value for them in teaching, whether it's a nurse, how to be more sensitive to our elders, or in social work, how to deal with the various issues that arise. So again, this is another example of work we created that was more in a journalistic vein, documentary vein, but had value in advocacy. And again, a further step in my evolution in realizing the potential of what we can do, the impact we can have beyond the media world, beyond the art world, if that's important to you. And so the idea is that these stories that we tell, these images we create, the stories we create, that they have real value out in the world to activists and people who are, pushing for change, whether it's legislative change, whether it's cultural or societal change. And ultimately that project led my wife and I, this is my wife and our daughter and her father, to care for her father when he wasn't able to live alone. So not only did this work have impact on others, we hope, but it also looks like, it also changed the way we approached our lives. Then in around 2004, 2005, I met Professor Michael Watts, who teaches at geography at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And he turned me on to this story, this issue of oil in the Niger Delta and the exploitation after 50 years of oil and gas exploitation in this region of Nigeria, how the impact it had on the people there. And this took me to yet another stage of, again, not only in my editorial journalistic world, but also in advocacy. It took me to this whole other level of understanding how you can create work that can have real impact. Ultimately, this work was used along with other materials by Oxfam America to actually cause legislative change. A bill was passed in Congress ultimately that required more transparency within the oil and gas industries, or what we would call the extractive industries, including coal mining and so forth. And they used my work to create an exhibition that went to 10 universities around the United States, where there were lectures around, again, raising awareness about the issue of oil and gas, not just in Nigeria, using that as an example, but also, this bill that was working its way through the United States Congress. So again, there are many ways we can have impact through our work. And, there are amazing people besides myself who are having tremendous impact in the work they do, where they've even created their own nonprofits, so they're not only functioning as storytellers, visual storytellers, but also as, advocates. For me, I focus on what I feel I do best and what I'm capable of doing, which is storytelling with passion, with compassion and intimacy, and then try to find the right partners. And that's a key element in doing this work, is finding the right people to partner with so that they can effectively work to affect change using our materials. The experience I had, besides the work I created in Nigeria and the Niger Delta, changed my life completely, because I'd never experienced this level of economic inequity and sort of a gross violation of human rights and degradation of the environment. So many things that just made my blood boil and empowered me or inspired me to go back multiple times to what is a very inhospitable and difficult place to work. An amazing place. Nigeria is an amazing place, but when you go there as a photographer or a filmmaker or as a journalist, it's a very different experience, because you hit up against some major headwinds of whether it's the security forces, the government, the oil companies, even the villagers, the people don't necessarily want us there telling their story. So working in this area creates tremendous challenges, but it was worth it because the impact of the work and also just the experience that I had were life-changing. So these three projects that I've shown, which I consider long-term personal projects in the course of my career, all ultimately had some element of advocacy to them, whether I realized it or not. And then I don't know, somewhere around 2010, it feels, I always think of that date as a marker where things started to shift. We came out of that, we were just limping out of the terrible economic, the Great Recession. Certainly this industry, photojournalism and the editorial world, were seriously hit economically by it. And in many ways, we've just never recovered. It's morphed into other things that are also quite exciting. But, the world, the sort of paradigm I grew up in, it existed, but it was like a shell of what it was. But what I started to do was get opportunities from, again, NGOs, nonprofits. So for example, this NGO out of San Francisco, the Vietnam Reporting Project, thankfully asked me, among about, I think, 15 other broadcast journalists, writers, photographers, filmmakers, to create stories about Agent Orange. And so I went to Vietnam for two weeks to produce a story about these families that we're still having impact of the enduring impact of Agent Orange, which is passed down through genetics. So as in Vietnam, but even in the United States, like at this point, the great grandchildren of American veterans who fought in the Vietnam War, we have kids that are being born with disabilities because of the enduring genetic impact of Agent Orange. So I know for some of you, this might be like too granular, in the weeds, wonky, but for me, this stuff just turns me on, because that's part of why I wanted to do this work before I even understood what doing this work meant. It's because I am a lifelong learner. I love learning about things, but I also love being able to tell stories about the things that I'm interested in, especially when they have a real human impact. So I created a 15-minute film on this work, as well as a bunch of still images. And I'm going to play a 1-minute trailer from this project.
Hey, Ed, there's no sound on the video.
So that there's no sound, Gianna?
Yeah, there's no sound coming through.
Oh, that's a bummer. Well, thankfully, I'm not showing too many other videos, but not exactly sure how to work that out. And I don't want to get sidetracked on that. But I think I'm only showing one other video. But sorry about that, folks. Zoom is very persnickety about like certain presentation elements. So anyway. So that work, went on the World Press. It was published. The stills were published around the world, and the video was also seen around the world through various functions. So it was the beginning of where I was creating work that had like a hybrid a birth, if you like. While it was still being seen in the editorial world and the areas that I kind of grew up in and came out of, but it was also being used now. This was a Ford Foundation funded project by, in this case, a major foundation. And through the work that I and the other folks in the Vietnam Reporting Project did, there was legislation passed that earmarked millions of dollars to the Vietnamese government to clean up one of the last remaining major hotspots of Agent Orange in the city of Da Nang, where the U.S. Air Force had a major air base. And so a lot of the defoliant, this chemical, was stored there. So again, it's another example. And again, look, let's be realistic. The majority of the work we will do in this vein, we're just it's just a part of making change. It is not, the change is not happening because of me or the work I've done, but it's fulfilling to know that even to just have a small part of the conversation, or to have a small impact as part of a larger impact, means a lot to me. And I think for those of you who want to do this kind of work, it should be what sort of energizes you to keep on going. So I've done a lot of work with the Open Society Foundation. This is another example of the sort of paradigm shift where a foundation, this one based in New York, is hiring, is commissioning photographers and filmmakers like myself and others to produce, stories that really could just as easily have been commissioned by Time Magazine or Former Life Magazine, but instead I'm being commissioned by a nonprofit. So this was a piece we did about police profiling in Europe. I went to the UK, France, and Holland to do a series of portraits of people who were being profiled, people of color, of course, who were being profiled in Europe by the police. In this case, this is in Leicester in the UK, and this gentleman is a policeman, but when he wasn't in uniform, he would be stopped and frisked and hassled by the police. So not to go too deep or granular in this particular project, but in this case, I decided to approach it through portraiture, using like an LED light to kind of almost put a spotlight on the people within public spaces where they had been or would be hassled by the police. And ultimately, this work was used by the Dutch police as sensitivity training for their officer corps. So again, I always say, and I'm not the only one who has said this, but while it's great to have the cover of National Geographic or major media where you reach theoretically millions or tens of millions of people, there's also something when you're looking at doing advocacy work, if you just reach the right 500 people or the right 2,000 people, especially if they're change makers, politicians, legislators, so forth, that you can have a real impact. And this is behind the scenes stuff. And what we did was, in the way I approached this is, environmental portraits, and then video interviews, which work as sort of testimonies by the people, so they are allowed to speak in their own voice and tell their story about the impacts of police profiling. In 2016, Seven received, through the great work of Gary Knight and Ron Haviv, they conjured up a project about the Millennial Villages Project, and this was an initiative by Jeffrey Sachs, an economist at Columbia University in New York, to basically focus funding on specific places in Africa to see if local investment, concentrated investment, could improve the lives of the people. And so I went to Ghana, and there's just a few images, but this is another example of how we can do this kind of advocacy work. In this case, it's sort of partially academia, partially private funding. And then I went for a couple of weeks, or not quite, to Ghana, produced a film and a set of pictures that were published in a book that went into a bus that traveled around the United States for many, many months, stopping at schools and teaching kids about, the Millennial Villages Project. 3 other photographers from Seven, Gary Knight, Ron Haviv, and Danny Wilcox Fraser, they also went to different parts of Africa to tell similar kinds of stories. And so, again, this work can be so fulfilling. And also one of the beautiful things that I witnessed in these villages, in this concentration of villages in Ghana, is that the development that was brought over the previous 10 years meant that now pregnant moms were getting ultrasounds, and the infant mortality rate went from a very high to virtually nothing. And these wonderful programs were instituted so that moms, not only when they were pregnant, but then after they gave birth for up to 6 months, there was monitoring by nurses about not only the baby's health, but the mother's health. So it, and then education, of course, there wasn't even a school in this village, and then now there's a school. So it was great to see and be a small part of a project that was bringing real change to the people there, and then extend, by virtue of our work, that message out to a broader audience. So much of this is about, in a way, setting examples or giving examples through our work, whether it's individuals who are inspiring, communities, or a project or a development project in this case. So now I want to just play a couple of short videos. I don't think I'm going to play them all through, but this is something that just recently came about working with UNICEF. And this is what I really call branded content, that because most of the work I've done in this vein, I've been given, when I talk about authorship, and sorry about that, when I talk about authorship and creative freedom, I've had tremendous luxury to be able to have and hold on to that in my work. Working with UNICEF is an example of a different kind of, it's more of like client work, and I don't say that in a pejorative way, because client work can be sometimes the most effective ways to make change and have impact. But anyway, so let me play these. But this is something I did just recently, the end of last year, out on Long Island, about a undocumented teen. Oh, that's right. There's not going to be any music, so forget it. But the visuals are really nice. So maybe I'll just talk over it. But anyway, so this was a story about a young kid from, I think he's from Guatemala, and he was rapping, and he had been in trouble, and through a local program that UNICEF was supporting, that was basically kind of rescuing, empowering, helping young teens, immigrant teens, he was able to turn his life around. And that's simply what this short film is about. And we looked at this young man and then a group of sisters who had gone through similar experiences where their lives were turned upside down through sort of the dysfunctional immigrant process we have here in the United States. He's from Honduras, sorry. And anyway, so that's what this is about. And then last year, late 2019, I went to Afghanistan for UNICEF to do something on landmines. And again, I know if there's no audio, it's not quite the same, but you get to hear me talk over it. I'm sorry about that. In this case, I'd never been asked to do this, really, to shoot this with my iPhone. And so it was interesting. It was like an interesting creative challenge of, how do I tell the story of these two young boys who both lost their legs in landmine. And this was about landmine victims or survivors in Afghanistan, working only with my iPhone. So in this case, you're almost storyboarding, what are the images, what are the clips I need to help tell his story. And because of the security issues, I think all of this was shot was produced in like a 3-hour period. So this was a very challenging project, but this is in Kandahar. But anyway, I was pleased with the results. It reached millions of people because UNICEF has that kind of reach. So again, when I began 40 years ago in this profession, I never imagined I'd be doing something like this, working for UNICEF and producing these short videos on this thing called a smartphone. So, I'm a big believer in not lamenting what we've lost and how it used to be. I'm much more interested in figuring out what do we have now to create and produce work and disseminate work and utilize and take advantage of those new creative opportunities and platforms. So, it's, regardless of what one thinks of UNICEF, it's a beautiful thing to be able to create something that can reach so many people. And I know that after this video appeared on their Instagram feed, a few people reached out to me around the world directly to donate money for the surgery for these two boys. So again, you can make legislative change, but you can also reach an individual out in the world through our work, where then it inspires them to get involved and to engage with these issues and to help others. So many ways to have impact, beyond just raising awareness, which is fine on its own. But I'm at this point more interested in in being a part of making change. Okay. This next set of pictures are from a project I did about Syrian refugees. And so this was an example again of the paradigm shift, where instead of going to media, I went to International Medical Corps. It's basically America's Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. And they're an amazing organization based in Los Angeles. They work, I think, in 70 countries around the world, doing, disaster relief, frontline, conflict, healthcare. But I knew that they had opened up programs in Turkey and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon to take care of Syrian youth. And that's the story I wanted to do. I had been to Syria many times prior to the civil war and over the previous 20 years. And, I felt a real fondness for the Syrian people and, just had seminal experiences there in my life. And I was just shattered by what I saw as like a whole generation of Syrians that were basically losing their youth. And so I pitched the idea to IMC, International Medical Corps, and thankfully they agreed to finance my trip to Northern Iraq and Jordan to produce this work. But the way the paradigm shifted is that, so I did a series of stills, but I also produced about a 15-minute film. And ultimately, this was published by Time magazine. And so this is where the paradigm shift. And I think increasingly, increasingly, this is what we need to look at is while, hey, it's amazing if you can get a major magazine or media outlet to commission and to finance your field work. I mean, ultimately, in my heart, in my mind, that is the best scenario. But the reality is these organizations just don't have adequate funding to do the kinds of project, at least that I want to do in some cases. So we go to alternative sources of funding, NGOs, foundations, nonprofits, and academia. And so in this case, it's about really the point is to produce the work, because once we produce the work, then good things can happen. And so in this case, by having it appear on Time magazine, it reached millions of people. And I obviously didn't make change, because I don't know how you change the Syrian civil war, but at least it raises awareness about the youth of Syria and the impact that this war has had on them and the refugee and the displaced people in general. So I'm not going to play the excerpt of the video since there's no sound, but you can go to either my website or talkingeyesmedia.org or Time magazine and look it up, Syria's Lost Generation, to see the full film. So the current project that I'm working on now, which I'm now in my 7th year, is about chronic kidney disease around the world. And this to me represents, in a sense, like the full cycle of my evolution in doing and also understanding advocacy work and what it means and the potential of it. From the beginning, this project was predicated on doing advocacy work and making change. And so from the beginning, I was working with an amazing activist who's impassioned about this issue, with doctors, epidemiologists, researchers, and scientists who are all working on trying to figure out the cause of this disease and possible solutions. And so I've worked in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, in India, Sri Lanka, and Peru over the last 7 years on this project. And tens of thousands of people, mostly poor rural agricultural workers, have died or contracted this illness. And it's a disease that attacks a different part of the kidney than the usual causes of kidney disease, which are obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes. None of those factors contribute to this. This is really a heat stress, and the way I see it, an impact from global warming, where these folks who are working so hard in 90-degree, 100-degree weather for hours at a time without adequate hydration, shade from the sun, and rest during the workday, it's just clearly taxing their kidneys in a way that these other kidney-related diseases don't. And so for me, this was from the beginning. Once I went to Nicaragua the first time in 2013, I saw with my own eyes a funeral almost every single day in this one community, Chichigalpa, in this case, sugarcane workers. I resolved myself, like, this is going to be my next personal project. And I'm specifically going to produce short videos, photo essays, environmental portraits, and reportage on this issue, so that it could be filtered out not only into the media, and this work has now been published all over the world, presented, Nat Geo, New York Times, The Guardian, NPR, but also exhibited at Perpignan in France, and using social media to also extend the impact of this. And social media has been a huge part of this project, and then had an exhibition at the Melkweg Gallery Museum, in Amsterdam a few years ago, 2015. So, these are all ways that I've been able to have impact with this work, but it's also been used by the activists that I work with to kind of galvanize, in a sense, like international protocols among researchers and scientists on how to figure out the cause of these diseases, set up like protocols for blood and urine samples, so forth and so on. Again, I'm getting nerdy, wonky, and granular, but that is part of doing this work, that it's not just about making cool images. All right, it's not just about being an artist. It's about having responsibility in the work we create, having it grounded in fact as much as we can possibly do that, and telling real stories about real people in real situations in real time. And then that work has the validity to then be used to affect change. So what was really beautiful in the evolution of this particular project is a year ago, actually, I returned from Nicaragua, where I had gone for The Guardian to tell the story about how this one new program, it's called the Adelante Initiative, sorry, having trouble speaking today, which is initiated by La Isla Network, which is the organization I've been working hand in glove with for the last 7 years. They inaugurated an initiative which brought rest, water, and shade to these sugarcane workers. And so in this case, I was going back not to chronicle people dying, and I did some of people who are still sick, but it was more about, how they're bringing this initiative to the workers, and they're testing them. They're taking their blood pressure and their temperature at the beginning of the workday. This is at 5 a.m., right at the fields where they would then go work all day. And then at the end of their work shifts, monitoring their heart, their heart rate and their temperature, all in the effort to figure out the efficacy of this program: rest, water, and shade. How simple is that? It doesn't bankrupt the sugarcane company. It's a minimal cost to do right by their workers. And what's so beautiful is what they found out is that not only is the incidence of this disease going down among the workers, but their productivity has increased. So how beautiful is that? And again, it's as simple as having a tent at the field, so that instead of working 4 hours in 100-degree weather with inadequate hydration, they work, whatever it is, an hour and 15 minutes, then they take a 15-minute break. And throughout the day, they maintain that kind of a regimen, and it has improved their health and improved their productivity. So, for me, this is a very gratifying, and that might not be quite the right word, because there's still people that are sick and they're dying from this disease. But, it gives one hope that as a journalist or as a visual storyteller, we aren't always just pounding the drumbeat of negativity and hopelessness and conflict and disease and death, but that there are organizations out there, there are programs out there that are trying to improve the conditions for people. And frankly, at this point, that's what keeps me going, is the knowledge and the belief that we can, as storytellers, create work that not only shines a spotlight on problems, absolutely, and unflinchingly we should do that, but also provides information, imagery, stories about characters, about organizations, about governments, whomever it may be, corporations, I don't really care, but any entity that is trying to improve or ameliorate a bad situation. All right, last project I want to share with you, Newest Americans. This is a project I've been working on with my wife, Julie Winokur, and Tim Raphael, a professor at Rutgers University in the city of Newark, which is the largest city in the state of New Jersey, where we live. So this is an example of, what I call hyperlocal storytelling, this idea of telling hyperlocal stories of global significance. And so unfortunately, I can't believe there's no sound. That is so annoying, but I wanted to play this sort of teaser reel, but I don't think it's pointless without sound, but at least you get the visuals while you have to hear my voice drone on. But in the last 6 years, the way we devised this project, and it was all funded by academia, major funding for 3 years, and then we got an NEH grant to extend it for another 2 years, and we've gotten some other grants. So this is an example of a project that was created through various forms of funding. We have had this work, both the films and the stories, the photo essays, published in, again, Nat Geo and the New York Times and the Atlantic and major media, the Nation, and so forth. So again, it's that new paradigm. You don't get the funding necessarily, or even the imprimatur from the editors out there, from the editorial world, but you find other ways to create the work, and then you present it to the editorial world, and they become the dissemination tool for the work. All right. So you don't necessarily see them as a major part of the funding model. Okay. And that's a critical thing to get into our heads. And I mean, personally, it's upsetting to me, because I grew up in the profession where you went to them for funding as well as dissemination. But hey, that's the world we're living in now, and we have to accept, again, as I said earlier, I'm not interested in lamenting the past. I'm interested in moving forward and figuring out solutions, because I want to continue to do this work. So this, and also I only produced some of the work here. Ashley Gilbertson, Ron Haviv, Maciek Naberdalak, Polish photographer, and Seven. So this was a Seven project as well. It was Rutgers University, Seven Photo, and then Talking Eyes Media, the production company that my wife runs. We were the three partners that has made Newest Americans come alive. So what we call it is a collaboratory, and it was a very unique project. So I'm just going to share a couple of short photo pieces that I did for this project. So this was about immigrant detention in the United States. So we did a series of portraits that were quite manipulated for me, but that was the whole vision of them, of people who have been immigrants who had been detained for periods of months or years, even though they had done nothing illegal and they had not broken any laws. They just came to the United States for asylum. And, I don't know if you guys know this, but probably 90% of our immigrant detention system is privately run. That means there is a profit motive to detaining these innocent, mostly innocent people. So for me, this is outrageous. So we created this set of pictures. These are not all of what we did. And then we exhibited them life-size, like 7-foot tall canvas prints. And then in the caption next to it, there was a code that if you called it, then these folks, the voice of the subjects would call you back and tell you their story. So that was the way we approached this. So that's the other thing, is there's so many creative ways now besides just an image and a caption, right? There's so many ways. And for those of you who are willing or desirous, if you can learn, it's so important to not only make still photographs. In today's world, it is so valuable, not only in terms of being able to be open to more opportunities to work and get paid, but also to be creative and to be artistic, is to learn to shoot video and to learn to collect audio. These are critical new tools that if you have, that again, not only creatively and artistically, it opens you up to doing things that as a still photographer, you were never able to do, but it also opens up the possibilities to create stories in different kinds of ways. And this is the last set of pictures. So this produced this last year during the pandemic. That's not over. Looking again, hyperlocal at this one town of Freehold, New Jersey, where Bruce Springsteen comes from, for those of you who care. And now it's like 50% of the population are immigrants, mostly Latinx immigrants. And so I worked with a writer, Marianne Carruth, who also works with the Newest Americans Project, to do a series of portraits and interviews with people in Freehold who show the impact of the pandemic on them. So in many cases, if they didn't get sick, they were kicked out of their living quarters. They lost work because it was very hard to get work during the pandemic. And so again, there's another example of where, now in this case, we're dealing with a story of the moment, not some historical story. And we were able to get this published in The Nation, as well as on our own branded online magazine, Newest Americans. All right, so that is it for presentation. What I want to do now is stop sharing my screen and go to some questions. Hopefully you guys have some questions. I just need to figure this out, how we stop sharing. Or Gianna, did you stop sharing for me? No.
I did. Sharing is stopped and you can see the questions.
All right, so welcome again, everyone. It's so weird not to be able to hear anybody. So I do feel like I'm speaking to myself, and I do that enough. No, but let's see here. I don't think I'm sharing my screen anymore. Yeah. So, all right. So I'm just going to start at the top. Let's see. Subhash Sagar, to tell a story of some specific person's life, what kind of framing techniques will be more intimate? Is it landscape or portrait? I'm mostly taking portraits. So I do find that that doing portraits with testimony, like the last two pieces I showed, is such a powerful and effective way to tell stories, even in the moment we're living in, where we're like deluged with way too much content, especially visual content, and like video is ascendant. In many ways it's dominant, but there is still something so powerful about a photograph and someone's personal story. So for me, that is still a great way to tell a story. It's also economical, both in terms of the time you spend with your subjects, right? Like when you're doing documentary work, you need to spend hours and hours and days and weeks with people to get their story. With portraits, you can do that in a shorter amount of time and still get an impactful, intimate personal story. So yeah, so that's that. Okay, Ron, Mr. Haviv, hello. Do you feel the label of advocacy pushes against the journalist label? And if so, how do you reconcile them? Great question. Not surprising coming from Ron. So I guess for some people, I know that there's some like editorial clients who, like the New York Times Magazine, for instance, who apparently will not publish anything if it's been funded by an NGO or a foundation. But the truth is they have over the course of their history done that. Probably one of the best examples is Sebastião Salgado's work with MSF and his work in the Sahel in the Sahel in the 80s. But anyway, it's not the point of this. The point is that there is no question that if you've created work that has been funded in sort of the advocacy under that label, that it can be difficult to get it published with certain media. But my attitude is that the way I reconcile it is that all I know, and I've proven this so many times, and I've seen others, colleagues and people I mentor and teach have also shown this, that when you create great work, good things will happen. So even if the New York Times Magazine won't publish it, there will surely be some organization or some outlet, whether it's in the media or it's within the foundation NGO world, that will disseminate that work. And now that we have social media, where I don't have a huge following in the grand scheme of things, but I can reach about 500,000 people just on my own. And let's say with the support of 7's social media channels, that that's not going to change the world, but that's a significant amount of people to touch, 500,000 people. So now there are different ways to sort of skin this cat, if you like. But and then in terms of this sort of label of journalist and advocate, when I'm on assignment for a publication or for anyone, I remain objective, and I know that my job is not to push my agenda or my opinion. But when I'm working on my own projects, quite often it is fueled by my agenda and my opinion of things. I just feel that in the world, there are some stories where there aren't two sides. There is a problem. It needs to be fixed. And we don't need to debate whether the problem exists. We need to figure out how to fix it. So thank you, Ron, for that. Nicholas LaSalle, how do you reach out to an NGO? Who does he contact, and how does he pitch his ideas? So, like with any, regardless of who you're pitching to, whether it's an editor at a magazine and newspaper, or it's a communications person at a Human Rights Watch or Open Society Foundation, you need to have a pitch that is concise, that is relevant, that explains why it should be done now, why you're the person to do it. Okay, so whether you're pitching to Nat Geo or Human Rights Watch, those principles remain the same. The other thing that's really important is the big question is, how do you find out who those people are to reach out to? That's something you do by either asking colleagues or just doing the online research to figure that out. But generally, these people are not hiding. Generally, so it's not very difficult to figure out who to reach out to at a given organization. So I suggest you start with, what is your idea? Hone that pitch, that proposal, so it's excellent, and then figure out who is that appropriate for. Because not all stories, obviously, and ideas are appropriate for everyone. And the more you're focused, I believe the more effective you can be in getting your work out there. From Ava, do you have advice for less established photographers to get into the NGO nonprofit space? I have this big project that I recently finished producing about climate, oceanographic research Chilean Patagonia during the pandemic. I don't know if you folks can see these stories, these questions, sorry, because I don't know if I need to read them. That's the reason I asked. But Gianna, if you want to let me know if they can see these questions, that'd be great. But anyway, but basically Ava's saying that I shared her crowdfunding campaign. Yay. So I'd love to take this project to the right places, but I don't know where to start. We're currently working on a book and a film, and also wonder what the right timing is. So again, it's sort of a similar answer to the previous question is you need to figure out who is the appropriate partner, client, whatever you want to call it, for your project. And then figure out where are the places that this project would be relevant, and then who are the individuals at those places that you need to contact who basically make the decisions on buying work or commissioning work. I know that's a simple answer. It's not easy to execute that. It requires diligence, it requires patience, and also we all need to have the resilience to be expected to be slapped down and rejected, and you just get back up and you figure, okay, what's the next door to knock on? I cannot emphasize that enough. And it's one of the things that is so difficult in so many of the creative fields, where we come to it not because to make money, we come to it to fulfill or a passion or a creative juice or energy that we have inside ourselves. And unfortunately, the creative world isn't necessarily so forgiving or interested. So you need to be resilient. You need to be strong, so that if one person rejects you, you don't give up. You keep on pushing forward. So an anonymous attendee, that's a great name. Okay, have you been filled with anger against politicians after all this suffering? If it is full, how can you continue to take a photo objectively? So I am constantly angry at politicians these days, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but it's become almost like a daily part of like mental health dilemma, really, to feel so disappointed and frustrated with politicians, not just in the United States, of course, particularly here because this is my home country, but I feel what we need to do is channel that energy into a positive way, because it does no good to just be angry or upset or bitter. That only tears us down. That only weakens us. So you need to channel that anger, channel that frustration into productive energy. So whether that is making photographs, making videos, or joining organizations, whatever that may be, whatever that may be, volunteering at a local food kitchen, especially now, or finding, the key is to attach yourself to a cause that you really care about. It all begins from that inclination, from that place. It's like the G spot for this. What do you care about? What's making you angry? And then forget about the politicians that are causing it. Figure out what are the organizations or the groups or the individuals you can partner with to get involved to affect change. All right, Tequila Minsky. Okay, that is the best name. Wow. iPhone because it's less, I guess the question is, did I use the iPhone because it's less obvious and intrusive? So in the case specifically of the Afghanistan project, it was requested partly out of logistics and timing because they needed the film turned around. And so I think that was partly it. But there's also that element that you point out that is correct, that at least for now, working with the phone, with a smartphone, definitely feels like less professional to people who observe us, and less intrusive. I would argue that it's only a matter of time until that condition doesn't exist anymore, because people will realize that work done with a phone can still be broadcast around the world, And ultimately, that's what people are, if they have a problem with us being there and recording anything, that is the issue, not the device we use. So if you're making a decision of what recording device to use, I would go with what will produce the best quality, and also that you are most comfortable working with, but knowing that iPhones and the Samsung's like the most up-to-date smartphones are incredible tools for both still photography and producing video. All right, Mark Silverberg, thank you for all these questions, folks, and I hope I'm answering them adequately. All right, Mark, many of your stories require travel, which is very challenging now. How do you suggest photographers find the intersection of the story they want to tell with what could be of service? So that's an interesting question, and kind of gives me a chance to promote, I mean, to mention my next lecture for 7, I think it's in a week or two, about hyperlocal storytelling. I should get that date correct. But anyway, I'm just looking up in my file of facts here. But anyway, I know that lecture's coming up. But one of the ways that I reacted to the pandemic and the sort of shutdown of travel, even though I've traveled quite a bit in the last year, but I decided to work hyperlocally and to tell stories that were in my backyard, because then I sort of mitigated the issue of travel, and also there was just something really beautiful about working locally. I mean, I got to say, folks, while it's amazing to be able to go to Afghanistan or places far away, it's such an honor and privilege to be able to do that, because we get to learn so much and tell stories that we might not be as familiar with and all that. There is something super powerful and totally relevant and effective in working on stories that are just in your backyard. So, so in the last year, I've done what I feel is a rich combination of working locally and coming up with ideas to work locally, by the way, not waiting to be assigned them, but also having commissions and working on ideas that require travel. I've gotten both my vaccinations, so while I still need to be careful for myself and the protection of others, there is a way to work out in the field today. It's just a matter of being observant and respectful of other people's boundaries and needs, and then just making sure your game is tight, that you wear a mask and you do all the things that make people feel secure and comfortable around you. Okay, Tequila, you're back. God, I'd love to know if that's your real name. I don't know if Tequila's a man or woman, but I'm interested in what a budget for any of these international shoots might be, from transportation there and country, paying fixers, hotels, etc. So, let's see, I would say, let's say on the Syrian refugee project, where I went for 2 weeks, and I spent a week in Jordan and a week in northern Iraq. I think the total, including all expenses, and I think I got like a $500 a day shooting fee, which at this point is not a very high shooting fee, but it's adequate. I think the total budget was maybe around $15,000, and then and then there was the post-production part, which Julie and Talking Eyes Media edited that film. So in that case, I can't remember if she got a little. Well, I know Time paid us maybe $2,300 or something as a licensing fee, which is really inadequate, but we're thankful for anything that these publications can offer. So let's say maybe it was around 20 grand when all is said and done to produce a 15-minute film and a set of photographs for 2 weeks in the field. Costs vary depending on where you're working. In the Niger Delta, it's crazy expensive because just everything is exorbitant. It's just very costly there. And especially if you go out into the creeks, into the riverine areas on a local boat, which is also incredibly dangerous now, you're spending hundreds of dollars. So it really depends on what your project is, what the cost of travel, the cost of, like in some places, you can get a fixer for, $100 or $75, but then in other places, the expectation is $250 a day. So, all of these things vary, cost of hotels, drivers, cars, but I hope that answered your question, but it's really important to make budgets, because it's not only important in your attempt to sell the idea to people, but also so you understand the cost of doing the work you want to do. Duncan DeFay, how do you do it? Photos as well as video, audio at the same time? Video is a lot of extra work. That is so true. Video is a lot of extra work, and in some ways it consumes the still photography part of the work. So what I went through a period, and the Syrian refugee work was done that way, where I was working with the Canon 5D, and I was basically using one device to do video and to do stills. And since then, I've really evolved into a proper filmmaker, where I'm working with proper video cameras, so I can get the great sound, and I can have 2 channels to work with a wireless mic and a shotgun mic, and lights when I need it, and all that. Just I can shoot 4K, but I'll just have, if I am planning on doing stills and video now, I'm basically going out into the world as a filmmaker that has a still camera around his neck. And so then I'll be judicious about when I make my still photographs, but it's all within the context of producing a film. Because Duncan, as you rightly point out, video is a hell of a lot of extra work, and it requires a different level of concentration to, in the moment, understand what is the narrative. You can't wait and tell it later, or you can't, like with still photography, you can kind of mess around visually and make images that with text or a voiceover can tell a story. With video, you've got to get it in the moment, and you've got to be sure you're getting all the different visual elements so that an editor can cut a scene that makes sense. So yeah, that's how I do it. All right, Seth K. At what point do you decide to add light to an image rather than using ambient light? What's your thought process in the field for the effort to make that work with documentary subjects? So in general, I would say probably with my still work, probably 95% of my still work is natural light at this point. I only use a flash if I want it for effect or as a solution, because it's just terrible light or light that's super low. But with these, new digital cameras, the sensors are incredible, the light that it picks up. And I also work a lot in still photographs with slow shutter speeds so that I can work with ambient light when it's low. Because even though ambient light might be low in terms of brightness, it can still render a beautiful image. So, and then with my video work, I'll only light A-roll interviews, like the formal interviews. And even then, I often look to use natural light or work with a combination of natural light and some amount of artificial lighting. In terms of video work, like the B-roll, the capturing scenes, the only time I would ever add light is if it's more of a, well, I'll give an example. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Louisiana. I'm working on this new documentary film about teen mental health in the United States. And all of our subjects have some kind of like superpower. And in this case, this young woman in Louisiana is this incredible dancer. And so we wanted to film her dancing. So in that case, we used artificial light and even brought in a smoke machine. I've never done that before, but in that case, it was, while it's a quote unquote documentary film, we are working in a way where some of the footage can be done where it's directed staged, if you like, as a way to make it more cinematic and all that. But in general, like 99.9% of my B-roll video work is with natural light. All right, anonymous attendee. How do you stay focused with the main topic you're working on, but find out there could be another story unfolding? Do you go back and find a way to explore it? Now, that's a great question. There's also kind of a complex one to answer. In some ways, there's nothing more unnerving than getting to the point where you're with your subject, you're in the scene, you've whether it's in your backyard or you've had to travel thousands of miles, and then you realize the story that you wanted to tell either doesn't exist really in the way you thought, or there's a more interesting or more relevant or more powerful story that is unfolding that you didn't know about or realize. I mean, I would say it depends. If you've been commissioned or you've sold the idea to someone, well, then you kind of need their approval or cooperation in shifting, because that can be a game changer for some publications, and certainly for organizations like NGOs and foundations. It'd probably be really difficult to change in midstream unless you have a really compelling argument to do it. Now, if it's your personal work where you're not getting paid, or you're free, you've structured the project in such a way that you maintain complete creative control and authorship, well, then you can do what you want. And then if you have to follow your instincts, and if you're in a situation and you went there to do one thing, but you see something else that you think is more compelling, then absolutely shift gears as long as you can pull it off. Maddie, hey, Maddie Simas. Okay, so working with subjects that have been traumatized by conflict or other forms of trauma, especially with children. 1, do you use a trauma-informed approach? 2, for yourself, witnessing so much trauma in your subjects, do you practice self-care? Great questions, folks. That's such an important question, and just such an important issue for us to deal with, because this issue of re-traumatizing your subjects, getting them in an interview to get to the point where they cry or they break down, or when I say getting them to do that, where, for some people that's like a goal, because you figure, oh, well, if they reach that like crescendo of emotion, then it will make our work stronger or more compelling. And while that may be true, you really need to be careful, and you need to be thoughtful about, and I would say definitely in the last year or two, and specifically, I have seen a shift in approach, not just in myself, but in general, because of the conversation that is going on in our profession, which Maddie's question reflects, which is that it's not good enough anymore for us to go into other people's lives and get them and re-traumatize them just for our own work. That is not okay anymore. It never was okay, but I think there was a kind of a lack of awareness or appreciation, and for many folks in that impact, in how in doing our work we can have like a bad impact on the people who've agreed to share their stories with us. So I try to approach it as sensitively as I can. When you talk about a trauma-informed approach, that sounds like a very specific training or maybe a guide that has been created. If Maddie, if that does exist, if you could share it, that'd be great. I know it exists, and I've seen things like that. I'm actually teaching a workshop for the Social Documentary Network right now about intimacy and trauma, and actually that is something that we're going to be talking about, is not only how to care for our subjects, but also how to care for ourselves, which brings me to the second part of your question, which is, witnessing so much trauma, do I practice self-care? So yeah, I've definitely had to change my approach. I would say that at this point, I'm pretty weighed down by all that I've witnessed and experienced through my work, and And I've had a couple of panic attacks in the field, one in Iraq in 2004 and one in Nigeria in 2006, where I realized like that some of this work was pushing me to the edges of my ability to cope. And so I do myself or anyone any good if I break down. What's the point of that? So now I am much more careful and judicious about the projects I choose to do, the situations that as much as I can control it, which I can't all the time, the situations I get myself into. So I will choose my projects now that I feel somewhat comfortable or confident, if you like. Again, there's no assurances in life that I'll be able to handle it, and that I would say that's simply the way to do it. Now, in terms of my self-care, for me, that a lot of that is simple things, trying to eat well, trying to get some rest. Having two beautiful children is probably the most powerful form of self-care, because it constantly every morning reminds me of the good out there and the potential in people, and specifically in my own family. So that brings me tremendous strength and resolve to push on. And of course, Julie is a real rock for me. So it really helps to have unconditional love in your life. It's not something that's easy to get. So I feel very blessed that I do have that. But these are great questions, and so relevant, because if we can't take care of ourselves, how can we take care of others? And in doing this work, we must take care of others. It is not okay to sort of rape and pillage other people's, I'm saying this metaphorically, other people's lives just so we have great work. All right. And I get very upset when I see people in the field working in that way. Thankfully, and I will say, this new generation of folks that I'm learning about and having the privilege to, in some cases, teach and mentor, but that I'm learning from, they're for the most part will have they won't work that way. The best of the new generations are exemplary in how we should have been all along. And so I welcome these new modes of working, this new awareness about the impact of our work on the people who collaborate with us to allow us to do our work, and then the impact of doing this work on ourselves. All right, a few more questions. Thank you, folks, for those who have hung on. This is great. Brian Castledine, why is it that certain commercial publishers, et cetera, won't touch NGO-funded work? That is a good question, and Brian, I'd love to know the answer to that. I mean, joking aside, I know what it is. Like in the case of the New York Times Magazine, as with the New York Times in general, probably the Washington Post, most of the kind of major media outlets that perform, regardless of what this fake news bullshit, but perform at such a high level of ethical standards, even though they're imperfect and individuals are human and make mistakes and do corrupt things. But in general, these very top media organizations work at such a high ethical level. So part of maintaining that sort of, divide of church and state, if you like, is the way they maintain that, I think, means that NGO funded work kind of falls into that category of work that is not, objective, quote unquote. So, I don't know how to get around that. Again, even the New York Times will sometimes, I've seen them bend those rules. But that's an interesting one. And boy, what I would love is to have a photo editor answer that question, because they will have they will be way more informed than me. I don't see behind that curtain. I just know what I know from talking to people or observing and making observations of how I think they behave. But I do know that I've had work rejected specifically by the New York Times Magazine because they asked, was that funded by a nonprofit? And when I said yes, they said, sorry, we can't publish it. So yeah, you have to work around that one. All right, J. Gerard Seguye, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Is there a project that you've always wanted to do but haven't for some reason? Oh my God, like hundreds of projects that I want to do, but for some reason I couldn't do. So to try to conjure up one right now would be very difficult. It's sort of like when I'm asked what is the favorite project I've produced, it's really hard for me to identify just one, because they're kind of like my children, my babies. It's that kind of a thing. They're so precious. But you know, I would say, yeah, it's just hard to answer that question. I'm so sorry, but there's so many things that I want to do that you know, one human cannot do all of them. So instead, I focus, you know, in the moment. So right now, you know, I'm continuing to do the work on chronic kidney disease. I don't see an end to that in the near future. And then with Julie, where we kickstarted a project in Georgia during the election that we hope to extend, looking at majority minority communities in the United States as a way to show where America is moving in terms of its diversity, and you know, this idea that you know, in a matter of decades, the United States will probably become a majority minority country, and what are the implications of that? So that's a project right now that we're working on. Okay, last question from Anonymous. Are you working on multiple stories or one at a time? I'm always working on multiple stories. You know, it's that mix of juggling commissions, you know, work, you know, assignment work that comes to me, and then personal projects that I am developing and producing on my own, or with Julie, or with other partners. You know, there's always like, you know, Julie always talks about, you know, having, you know, lots of plates spinning like a juggler in the circus, and the goal is not to have too many plates spinning, because invariably more than one of them will fall and crash. But that's always the balancing act, is how do you you know, make a living? How do you do the work that you will be fulfilled by? And in this case, with advocacy work, how do you create work, whether it's commissioned or your personal work, that will have an impact on the world? All right, well, we made it. Again, thank you folks for joining. And I don't know if there are other questions, or, you know, Gianna, help me out here. Is there
all good to go.
Is there anything? Thank you, Ava, for your sweet comment. If there are no more questions, I think we're done. But again, thank you folks for joining, and for being part of, you know, the 7 ecosystem, and you know, for us doing these lectures, and whether it's the book lectures, or in this case, you know, subject specific lectures, are so important to us. We feel it's a way that, you know, we can not only share our work and share our experience, but also extend community, build community, and also give back. So everyone, take good care of yourselves. We're gonna beat this thing. I feel we're coming around, you know, the back end of this, and just everyone take good care, and hope to see you somewhere soon. All right, be well.